There are moments in life when we find ourselves facing situations that seem greater than our ability to handle them. Circumstances that leave us vulnerable, exposed to fear and anxiety. In those difficult times, when the heart is troubled and the mind finds no peace, there is a word of hope that has crossed the centuries and reaches us with power and authority. No harm will come to you because God delivers you today. Psalm 5 is a morning prayer of a man who knew well what it meant to be surrounded by adversaries, by people who wished him harm, by situations that threatened his peace and safety. David, the author of this psalm, was a warrior, a king, but he was also a human being who faced real battles, both on the battlefield and in the spiritual realm. And that is precisely why his words carry so much strength and relevance for us today. When we read this psalm, we realize that it is not just an ancient religious text but a vibrant and living declaration of faith. It is a cry of trust in the midst of chaos, an affirmation that there is a God who hears, who cares, and who acts on behalf of those who take refuge in him. The central message of this psalm is clear. God is protector, righteous judge, and defender of those who live uprightly before him. The morning is described at the beginning of this psalm as the chosen moment to seek God's face. There is something deeply symbolic about that. Morning represents new beginnings, the renewal of hope, the first moment of the day when we can surrender our worries and desires to the Lord. David established a spiritual discipline of starting his days in God's presence, and that was no coincidence. He knew that the strength to face daily challenges came from that morning encounter with the Creator. Many times we go through our days without this kind of spiritual preparation. We wake up and immediately dive into worries, bad news, unfinished problems. We grab our phones before we pray, we check messages before seeking divine direction. And then we wonder why we feel so vulnerable, so exposed to adversity. The answer may lie precisely in this reversal of priorities. The psalmist speaks of those who practice iniquity, who lie, who shed blood, who deceive. He is describing real people who posed concrete threats to his life and reign. But there is also a spiritual aspect to this description. These figures represent all the forces of evil that try to harm us, whether they are people, circumstances, or even internal battles we fight within our mind and heart. The declaration that God abhors those who practice evil is not a display of divine cruelty but an affirmation of his holy and just nature. God cannot coexist with injustice, with lies, with violence. His holiness requires that he stand against all that destroys, that wounds, that corrupts what is good and true. And it is precisely because of this holy nature that we can trust in his protection. When the psalm declares that no harm will come to us, it does not mean that we will never face difficulties or be immune to all of life's problems. What this promise guarantees is that nothing will destroy us, nothing will have the final word over our story, nothing will be able to separate us from the love and care of God. Even when we walk through dark valleys, even when circumstances seem overwhelming, there is divine protection at work on our behalf. The trust expressed in this psalm is not blind or naive. It is a confidence grounded in the knowledge of who God is and how he acts. David was not saying he would never be attacked or face danger. He knew very well that the risks were real. But his trust was anchored in the certainty that God was greater than any threat, more powerful than any enemy, wiser than any evil strategy. There are moments in our lives when we need that same trust. When the medical diagnosis is worrisome, when the financial situation is critical, when relationships are in crisis, when we feel we are losing control over our circumstances. It is in those moments that the words of this psalm become not only inspiring but vital for our spiritual and emotional survival. The deliverance that God offers is not always in the way we expect or at the time we desire. Sometimes he delivers us by changing our circumstances. Other times, he delivers us by changing us, by giving us the strength and wisdom to endure difficult situations. And there are moments when deliverance comes in the form of inner peace amid the storm, a peace that makes no logical sense but is deeply real and transformative. Prayer, as presented in this psalm, is an act of coming before God. It is not merely speaking words but positioning the soul. It is recognizing who we are and who God is. It is admitting our need and his sufficiency. It is opening our hearts with transparency and honesty, knowing that we don't have to pretend or hide anything before the one who already knows all our thoughts and feelings. Many people struggle to pray because they feel they must use beautiful words or possess a special eloquence. But David's prayer in this psalm is direct, honest, and passionate. He expresses his needs, his fears, his trust, and his worship authentically. And that is exactly what God expects from us. authenticity, not religious performance. The psalm also speaks about the joy of those who trust in God. This is a joy that does not depend on external circumstances but springs from a deep connection with the divine. It is possible to be going through a difficult period and still have this joy, because it is not based on what is happening around us but on who is with us along the journey. The divine protection mentioned in the psalm is compared to a shield. A shield is a defensive weapon used to block attacks. When God is our shield, He is actively defending us, deflecting blows that could destroy us, preventing the forces of evil from succeeding in their plans against us. This is a powerful image of care and active protection. There are people who live as if they are constantly at the mercy of evil forces, as if they were helpless victims of all kinds of harm. But Psalm 5 invites us to a different perspective. Yes, there are real threats. Yes, there are people and circumstances that can harm us. But above all of that, there is a God who is our protector, our defender, our shield. God's justice is another important theme in this psalm. David was not asking for personal revenge but crying out for divine justice. He recognized that it was not his place to judge or punish his enemies but trusted that God, in His perfect justice and in His time, would do what is right. This is an important lesson for us. We do not need to take on the role of judges or avengers. We can trust that God takes care of justice while we focus on living according to His principles. The concept of righteousness presented in this psalm is not about impossible moral perfection but about a sincere heart that seeks to please God. It is about living with integrity, making choices based on divine principles, and pursuing truth and justice even when it is costly. This righteousness is not something we achieve through our own efforts but is the fruit of a living relationship with God. When we think about deliverance, our minds often go to dramatic and extraordinary situations. But God's deliverance also happens in the details of daily life. It is that accident that could have happened but didn't. It is that harsh word that was about to leave our lips but was held back. It is that temptation that was overcome. It is that wrong decision that was avoided. Many of God's deliverances go unnoticed because they are not spectacular, but they are no less real or important. The presence of God in the lives of those who seek Him is presented as a source of security and joy. It is not a distant or abstract presence but an intimate and personal one. It is a presence that knows us deeply and yet loves us unconditionally. It is a presence that confronts us when necessary and comforts us when we are wounded. It is a presence that transforms, heals, and empowers. This psalm challenges us to examine where our trust is placed. Do we trust in our own resources? In our intelligence, strength, or ability? In other people? In human systems? Or is our trust rooted in God? This is not a theoretical question but an extremely practical one. Our answer determines how we live, how we face challenges, and how we react when things do not go as planned. Morning is once again mentioned as a time to seek God, and this speaks to us about priorities and spiritual discipline. It is not easy to establish a routine of prayer and seeking God, especially in a world that moves so fast and is filled with distractions. But the benefits of this practice are immeasurable. It is in the quiet of the morning, before the noise of the day takes over, that we can hear God's gentle voice, receive direction, find peace, and be strengthened for what is to come. The psalmist speaks of presenting his prayer and then waiting. There is an active expectation here. It is not just about speaking and rushing off, but about speaking and remaining, waiting, being attentive to God's response. How many times do we say our prayers but fail to wait to hear what God has to say? How many times do we ask for help but do not give time for divine help to manifest? Active expectation is an essential part of the life of prayer. The description of the wicked in this psalm is strong and direct. They are portrayed as people whose mouths are full of deceit, whose hearts plot destruction, whose throats are open graves. These are powerful images that warn us about the reality of evil in the world. We cannot be naive in thinking that everyone has good intentions or that there are no people and forces actively working to destroy what is good and true. But even in the face of this dark reality, the psalm maintains a tone of confidence. The psalmist is not paralyzed by fear, nor dominated by anxiety. He recognizes the threats, but his eyes are fixed on God, who is greater than them all. This is the key to living with peace. In a world full of dangers, recognizing the threats without allowing them to dominate our perspective or steal our peace. The blessing pronounced over the righteous at the end of the psalm is broad and profound. It is not just superficial protection, but divine favor that surrounds every aspect of a person's life. It is like a shield that encircles on all sides, leaving no vulnerable area. This image gives us a sense of complete security, not because of our own strength or merit, but because of God's faithfulness and power. When the psalm declares that God delivers today, there is a sense of urgency and immediacy in it. It is not merely a promise for a distant future, but for the present. God acts now, intervenes now, protects now. This does not mean that all our problems will be instantly solved, but it means that God's presence and action are available to us at this very moment. The life of faith presented in this psalm is not passive. It is a life of active seeking, constant prayer, and determined trust. It is doing our part while trusting that God will do His. It is living with integrity while resting in divine protection. It is recognizing our limits while relying on God's unlimited strength. There is a difference between worry and watchfulness. Worry paralyzes and consumes us. Watchfulness keeps us alert but confident. This psalm calls us to spiritual watchfulness, to be attentive to the spiritual realities around us, but always with our eyes fixed on God, who is our protector and deliverer. The promise that no evil will befall us gains new meaning when we understand that the greatest evil that could happen to us would be to be separated from God. As long as we remain connected to Him, as long as we dwell in His presence and under His protection, we are safe in the deepest sense possible. Difficult circumstances may come, losses may happen, pain may be felt, but none of this separates us from God's love or cancels His care for us. This psalm invites us to begin each day with God, to hand over our worries to Him, to trust in His protection, and to live with joy even amid difficulties. It is a call to a robust faith, not a naive one, that recognizes the harsh realities of life, but anchors itself in a greater and more powerful reality, the faithfulness and power of the living God. When we declare that no harm will come to us, we are making a statement of faith that challenges appearances. We are saying that, regardless of what our eyes see or what our circumstances suggest, we choose to believe that God is sovereign and that He takes care of us. This is not a denial of reality, but an affirmation of a greater reality that is not always visible to natural eyes. The deliverance that God offers today is for you. It doesn't matter how complicated your situation may be, how heavy your burdens are, how dangerous your enemies seem, or how dark your nights may appear. The same protection that covered David is available to you. The same God who heard his morning cries hears yours. The same faithfulness that sustained generations of believers will sustain you as well. This is not a time to give up or to surrender to fear. It is a time to renew your trust in God, to seek His face with greater intensity, and to declare your faith with greater courage. It is a time to remember all the times God has already delivered you in the past and to use those memories as a foundation to believe that He will deliver you again. It is a time to take your stand under His protection and rest in His care. The message of Psalm 5 transcends time and reaches us today with the same strength and power it had when it was written. God continues to be our refuge, protector, defender, and deliverer. His nature has not changed, His character remains the same, and His power has not diminished. His willingness to care for those who seek Him is just as real today as it was in ancient times. Therefore, rise up with confidence. Face this day knowing that you are not alone, that you are not unprotected, that you are not at the mercy of chance or human evil. You are under the covering of the Most High, surrounded by divine favor as with a shield. No evil will have the final word over your life. God gives you deliverance today, and that is a promise you can carry in your heart as you walk through life's journey.